Sara, Mac, and Mandy are both in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies. They both have PhDs from the Hispanic Linguistics program. And they both work together to coordinate the Interdisciplinary Language program in that department. And so I'm really pleased to introduce them to you. And their talk is about internationalizing the curriculum. International about how, considering second language teaching and learning from the perspective of the Internationalizing Teaching and Learning Framework. So please welcome Sandy.
I like it. You're Sandy too. Well, thank you all very much for being here today. I think many of us, because we're working in this university context, we're familiar with the different efforts that have been put forward to really internationalize our teaching and learning at the university. And so one of the things that we started thinking about is how oftentimes second or foreign language classes are assumed to be inherently international. And they really do have the potential to contribute significantly to these internationalization efforts. And we're going to explore this today in the talk. I'm going to start with a little bit of a literature review. What are other people in the field saying about foreign languages and internationalization? And then Sara is going to share with you some of the work and our thinking that we've been doing. We do not by any means propose to give you all the answers today, but we do want to share with you the journey that we have been on and some of the ideas and questions that we've been raising, and we look forward to sharing those with you and hearing your thoughts then at the end. So, Altbach and Knight in 2007 identified a variety of reasons and motivations for universities' internationalization efforts. Among the ones that they identified are enhancing the research and intellectual capacity of a university, increasing the intercultural understanding within a university, enhancing a university's competitiveness or prestige, and in some cases there is even financial reasons for doing it, that there might be some economic gain for doing the internationalization. And so this definition that you have up here from 2004 really emphasizes how internationalization is at the center of universities' missions, right? When it says, the purpose or the process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, or delivery of post-secondary education. So it's really part of the mission of the university. And there have been many different ways that universities have gone about these. Some of these initiatives are large scale, and we've heard about these, and they're very common across institutions. And I'm going to probably say this person's last name wrong, I apologize. Siaya and Hayward in 2003 identified study abroad as a key effort in universities' internationalization efforts, as well as increasing international enrollments from other students from other countries, international studies or area studies programs, and also foreign language instruction. However, that role of foreign languages in the university internationalization effort has not always been clear. And so I've pulled two quotes here from two different scholars, Gelhar and Goodman, and these were both in a 2009 Perspectives column in the Modern Language Journal. And these really point out the thought that many scholars have that foreign languages play an essential and necessary role in educating global citizens. And these quotes that you can see here on this screen reflect the perspective that reflects the perspective of the language-based nature of knowing and meaning, and recognizes that in language, literature, and culture classrooms, the process of communication is the object of inquiry. And students have the opportunity in these classes to consider how individuals position themselves through languages and engage with social and political differences that get indexed in language. So while there's this one belief and one perspective on one hand that university language departments should and play a leading role in conversations about internationalization, giving their focus on language, literatures, and cultures, a number of scholars have pointed out that this isn't always the case. In fact, one of these scholars is Chantel Warner, and in a 2011 article, she points out a contradiction that we're seeing often in the field, where on the one hand, we have an increased emphasis on developing global and intercultural competencies in students. But at the same time, we're often seeing a perceived decrease in the perceived importance of foreign language departments on campus. So we have, there's been many reports over the past, I would say 10 years, about different universities closing language departments, eliminating foreign language requirements. And in fact, this week we just, I don't know if how many of you have seen the announcement that came out of University of Wisconsin River Falls that they're eliminating their majors in Spanish, French, and German. So this is happening. So we're having this contradiction. We have two different efforts that are going in different directions. And so this led Warner to comment, and I quote, "The role of language and literature departments in the project of internationalizing our higher education curricula seems at best murky and in the eyes of some marginal." So we're left with this uncertainty about what is our role. And this is another case in point. I know I mentioned University of Wisconsin River Falls. This example was in the Inside Higher Ed. It's a piece in Inside Higher Ed, and it's coming from George Washington University, who in 2010 reformulated their general education requirements. And when they did that, they determined that the introductory language classes did not meet the requirements to qualify as a Global Perspectives course. And this quote that we have on the screen here is from Teresa Murphy, who was an associate professor of American Studies and was the chair of the committee that led those, the efforts to revise the general education requirements. And she pointed out that it's because in those introductory language classes, students aren't thinking critically. And you can see here, you know, the foreign language may be very important and very difficult, but critical thinking isn't learning grammar. So this is part of potentially the issue that we're having, or the contradiction that we're seeing. And then a report by Knight in 2006 that looked at different fields and how internationalized they were, pointed out that humanities fields, which included foreign language and cultural studies programs, were among the least internationalized fields at some universities. So we dug into a little bit about why this might be the case. And there's many different reasons, and many different scholars have weighed in on this debate. And so you see here some of the different reasons. The fact that maybe languages aren't needed as much because English is now this lingua franca that can be used across the world. That there is an understanding of language as a skill, and that's what we're developing in the language classes. An assumption that students just need to be exposed to other meanings in order for them to get an international perspective. The commodification of language, which if you were at Claire Crumpsh's talk back in the fall, she talked about. And then also this shift in perspective where more value is attributed to rational, non-historical, non-contextualized, non-culture laden work. And those are that's in the words of Heidi Burns. So we took all this and we started reflecting on our local curriculum, and we are left asking ourselves, were our courses in foreign languages really internationalized? Were students engaging with these other foreign meanings, or were they just coming into contact with them? Was our curriculum more intellectually rigorous than what students were exposed to at the high school level? Were we exposing students to various perspectives and helping them discuss the different points of views that are adopted by speakers and writers? And as we did this, we were also reading a lot of literature that was problematizing and putting some of the, I don't want to say the blame, but explaining some of the dilemma on communicative language teaching practices. And they identified a number of shortcomings of that approach to language teaching. And I don't want to get into that too much, but I do want to talk about how Claire Crumpsh in a 2014 piece it was again, the Modern Language Journal did a special issue in 2014 on the role of foreign language in preparing global citizens, and she had the introduction. And in this piece, she identifies a number of strategies that we can do to increase the way international perspectives are brought into our classes. And you can see some of those here. So we don't just teach language rules for language rules' sake, but we really look at how age, gender, social class, and ethnicity interact with those rules and how speakers use them to communicate diverse forms of meaning. That we can adopt a more reflective, interpretive, historically grounded, and politically engaged pedagogy. And that we, again, focus less on those rules per se, but focus more on the fluid discourse processes, such as comparison, contrast, analysis, interpretation, inferencing, and recontextualization. And we can do that through developing students' metalinguistic awareness and metapragmatic reflexivity. So that's kind of what the field is saying at this point. I'm going to pass it to Sara, who's going to talk a little bit about our work and the framework that we worked with here at the university.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So in 2016, Mandy and I joined the Internationalizing Teaching and Learning cohort here at the University of Minnesota, which supports internationalization as it has been conceptualized here at the University of Minnesota. And as you can probably guess, soon after we began our work with the cohort, we realized that many elements of the framework would be effective in addressing some of the issues that have been raised that Mandy just reviewed. To begin with, it's useful to have a bit of background on this conceptual framework of the program, the definitions used, and the key questions that it proposes. So in terms of the conceptual framework, the ITL program at the University of Minnesota builds on concepts articulated by the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Their 2009 publication, Global Learning, What Is It? Who is Responsible for It? Takes on the task of problematizing global learning. And for those of us who are looking for a really quick answer, Kevin Hovland, who's the author of this article, in the very first paragraph does offer some quick questions and says, the quick answer to question 1, the what is it? His answer is, well, the definitions continue to evolve, right? And the quick answer for number 2, who is responsible for it? Maybe unsurprisingly, everyone. But of course, quick answers like this are really oversimplify the issue, which is, of course, extremely complex. And in fact, Hovland begins the article itself with a relatively stark characterization of current efforts, where he says there are a few colleges or universities that do not embrace the goals of increasing global awareness, global citizenship, and global responsibility as part of their mission. Yet, across all sectors, institutions continue to struggle to develop the best practices for translating goals into concrete curricular and co-curricular global experiences that are flexible, rigorous, and relevant to all students in all programs. So in other words, our work is really cut out for us in this area. Another additional element of the ITL framework here at the University of Minnesota is based on work done by Betty Leask from the University of South Australia, who defines internationalization of the curriculum as the incorporation of an international and intercultural dimension into the content of the curriculum, as well as the teaching and learning arrangements and support services of a program of study. So this is a very important element. What is key for Leask and is what is key to the ITL program as it has been developed here is that internationalization is not just about adding international and intercultural elements into course content. It also needs to consider the issues related to teaching and learning arrangements, things like support services as well. Those all need to be developed and in place as well if the goal of internationalizing is to be achieved. So within our local context, and one of the key things that Mandy and I worked with, a concept when we started the ITL cohort, is that internationalized teaching and learning framework is an intentional approach to maximizing students' international, global, and or intercultural learning, right? So I think sometimes it's easy to see the word international and figure, well, this just means from country to country. it's actually, we could use other words that are also helpful, things like global, intercultural, things that we are very familiar with if you are a language teacher. I know not everyone here is a language teacher, but as language teachers, these are all things we're very familiar with, and kind of makes me think of that phrase, well, you've had the ruby slippers all along, right? We just need to know how to click them together. And I think that was part of a little bit of the reaction we had too, right? A lot of these things are things that are not new to us. Nonetheless, a key question is to really have an understanding of what international, intercultural, and or global learning means in our field. And Mandy talked a little bit about that. And what about in your college? And what about in your department? What is the shared understanding of those terms? Another key consideration for the model here in terms of how the ITL program is set up is the placement of international, global, and intercultural learning at the center of the course. So is it clearly articulated and well understood vis-a-vis course goals? And of course, on the flip side, is it more like an assumed element in the course? Is it kind of a assumed byproduct? Another related question is, puts the focus a little bit more on instructors themselves. A key question, how do we self-reflect on our own personal and cultural values? And how do they affect how we approach second language teaching and learning? So here, again, right, if the instructor is the center of, or is directing what's going on in the classroom, if the instructor themselves, or we ourselves, are not reflecting on these kind of values, how does that affect our teaching? And then the final area of question related to that, of course, is what we actually end up doing. Do our practices reflect the standards to which we hold our students in terms of international, global, or intercultural learning? And I think a big part of that is, do we seek ourselves to understand different perspectives that challenge our own worldviews? So these are all some questions that are presented as key areas for reflection in the program. So taking into account all of these different aspects, the University of Minnesota does have a definition of global competence. And the definition is: globally competent University of Minnesota faculty, staff, and students will demonstrate the skills, knowledge, and perspectives necessary to understand the world and work effectively to improve it. So this is 27 words, very nice slide. You can just move on now and go, right? We're gonna actually analyze this a little bit. And I think because we see a lot of important messages just in these 27 words. First of all, this answers the question of who is involved: faculty, staff, and students, everyone. So this isn't just about preparing our students to be globally competent. The idea is that everyone's involved, everyone is implicated. There's also a broad treatment here of what some might call deliverables. So we have not just skills, right? So skills are often interpreted as what we're trying to give students, right? These things that we need to provide them to complete a task. What we see here is knowledge and perspectives are put on an equal footing with skills. And then finally, the message here is one of active application of these skills, knowledges, and perspectives. So there's the practical aspect of working effectively to improve the world. There's also acknowledgement and specific mention of the idea of understanding the world as well. So this is a very comprehensive definition. Again, just 27 words. And there's a lot of theory, a lot of work that has contributed to getting to this definition. And I'm just going to highlight a few elements of that in the next few slides. First of all, the definition mirrors, to a certain degree, taxonomy of significant learning as proposed by D. Fink. And some of you may be familiar with this model. It suggests that interactive learning can be categorized or can be divided into 6 different categories, all of which are necessary for active learning and significant learning to occur. So these include foundational knowledge, which is traditionally known as like the information and ideas. Application, so this is where skills come into play. The idea of critical, creative, and practical thinking skills, and things like managing projects as well. Integration is the idea of connecting ideas, people, realms, or spheres of life, different areas of life, and recognizing the interconnectedness between all of those areas. Fink also talks about the human dimension. And for him, it's learning about yourself, or oneself, as well as others. And the fifth category is one that some people have a little bit, take issue with the terminology, but in Fink's model, he calls it caring. It's the idea of developing new feelings, interests, and values. And finally, we have learning how to learn. And this is about how we can help our students to become a better student. I would say it's also how we can help ourselves to be better scholars, if we're looking at our own reflection, how we can be better teachers. The idea of inquiring about a subject and becoming self-directed or lifelong learner. So these are the, this is a major underlying principle of the program, and you'll see in our later slides how we integrated some of these things in our project. I also want to mention another key aspect of the ITL program here is that it's a structure that lends itself well to interdisciplinary work as well as disciplinary specific work. So you'll see alumni of the ITL program are scholars who work in music education, biology and life sciences, civil engineering, sociology, English literature, ecology, and a lot of additional ones as well. And looking at Sara could probably give me a few more, right? This is a representative sample. I mean, the point I want to make here is that the framework is useful across the disciplines. What we have, the University of Minnesota, I think, has been very successful at doing is having a framework that's general enough to go across disciplines, but also it really makes clear that how this takes shape in a course, how this looks across programs or departments has to be informed by, and in fact depends on, disciplinary specific knowledge, skills, and goals for student learning. So we're not taking it out of the discipline, we're using it to enhance what the discipline already does. So that begs the question, what does this look like in our discipline? How can this framework be helpful for resolving some of those issues that Mandy mentioned in the introduction? So the way that we've been conceptualizing this, the meeting, this is the meetup of second language teaching and learning with Internationalizing Teaching and Learning, ITL meets SLA. We've been thinking about it as a framework for systematically exploring global linguistic realities. And we're going to talk about, give a few examples of this, and specifically talk about how the framework can benefit different groups or different areas of the curriculum. So first of all, how can the framework, or what can the framework offer for language teachers at the individual level? We're just going to highlight a couple of the areas that we think are most relevant for today's talk. First of all, the framework, with the attention to reflection and self-reflection by the individual, gives us a way to intentionally and systematically reflect on our classroom practice. Some examples of where we think this could be applied are the idea of considering decentered language in the classroom. So decentered Spanish, for example, Jose del Valle in 2014 has a great article about recognizing what would traditionally be called the non-standard varieties of Spanish, right, or the marginalized varieties of Spanish. So not having not having any real traditionally accepted best Spanish in the classroom. Another area that the framework, I think we could apply the framework to talk about the rationalization and technologization of discourse. I'm not even going to try to say that again. Right, the idea that discourse serves as a way to accomplish things. There is a certain formula for discourse that is successful, that everyone should learn how to do, that applies to the majority of situations. And then the other thing, the other area where I think this framework is particularly helpful is the idea of, about assumptions about the application of your local culture and local cultural values to the global. So if you look at a cultural context from a different culture, you assess that in terms of what you already have the values from with your culture. And there's a lot of nice tools in the framework that provide a good way for problematizing these issues. Another big support of the program in terms of the individual level is the attention or the focus of the framework on the idea of the internationalization of the self. So Gavin Sanderson is one of the, or has a wonderful article related to this, and really kind of deconstructs the role that the instructor plays in the classroom, and also how important it is for the instructor themselves to be able to reflect on the same things that they're helping their students to understand. Next, we want to offer some ideas about the benefits of the ITL program at the course and programmatic level. So I think the biggest benefit we have seen so far, and I mentioned this a little bit before, it's an organizational framework, or it's a way to organize things that's broad enough to support multiple interdisciplinary pedagogical models. The way that this has worked for us with our project in Spanish 1004 is to have the internationalized framework also as a way to structure, as a way to organize the work that we also are doing with multi-literacies and the flight approach, and also inclusive teaching and learning. So, in other words, at the course and programmatic level, we would say that we have internationalized curriculum as a way of uniting different interdisciplinary approaches that we want to make sure inform our language instruction. We also want to share today a little bit about how we think that the ITL framework can be effectively integrated in a situation that's very common for a lot of us, which is in the multi-section, multi-instructor context. And again, I think I could give a whole talk just on this. There's a lot of different things to consider. The three things we want to highlight today is the importance of course goals, and especially with all the different kinds of messages our students get from classes to their social life all around, to make very clear the course goals and how they are tied to internationalizing teaching and learning. Accessibility, clarity, and transparency for both students and instructors is very important. And as with any pedagogical model, the idea of an instructor training and support is key, because once again, we have the instructor as the person who's representing an internationalized perspective, and how can we help people to internationalize the self in that way. And then another key that we have been developing but we don't have a final version yet, is this idea of mapping competency goals, objectives, assessment, and learning activities. And this is I think a really useful chart where you can look if we have the 6 different categories from Fink's model on the left, and then across the top, learning goals for the course, the kinds of assessment you're going to use, and then the actual teaching and learning activities that support these. So what we're working towards is to try to map all together our curriculum and the activities that we do to support these goals. And it's blank right now for a reason. We're working on it. Oops. So I'm going to talk a little bit today also about the pilot work that we've done in Spanish 1004, and the kinds of things or the ways that we have used the framework to, again, address some of the issues that Mandy mentioned at the beginning, and really try to make answer that question of, can a language class be international, right? What does international mean in our case, an intermediate level language class? The first example is the idea of transparency and intentionality. So this is, I think, for many people who teach here at the university are not in the position to change their course syllabus. So my hope would be, though, that everyone is in a position to contribute to discussions about that in their department. One of the things that we've tried to do is articulate, and you'll see Mandy is passing out right now the course goals and objectives, the draft that we came up with as a result of our work. And you'll see that was our attempt at clearly linking ITL to the course goals and objectives. The other thing we did was in our online course materials and on the syllabus, a systematic integration of the language related to the internationalized curriculum. And then finally, in the curriculum materials and in daily practice, and this was in the pilot sections that I taught, making the connection between what we're doing in class and the idea, those principles of internationalized approach very clear to students. Another example from our pilot work is the work we've done with curricular materials and class activities for two pretty traditional intermediate language learner topics. So across languages, these seem to be topics that come up in a lot of textbooks at the intermediate level. The world of work and jobs, and is one of the ways that one of the content areas that we've redesigned. I'm not going to say a lot about this except to give a brief overview of our approach, which is to look at job skills and jobs in the terms of, and analyze the cultural embeddedness of them. So what we're moving from is, how do we use Spanish to complete tasks or skills that are valued according to the US job market values? So things like, a US job market value, it would be to always have a very quick response when someone asks you a question, right? Be able to, if you get a question, you answer it right away. This is mirrored in our class participation rubrics, for example, right? It's when we talk to students about good participation, we talk about being able to answer questions fully and things like that. So we've taken a little bit of a step back from that, and from looking at text and job descriptions, look at the language used in job descriptions across different countries in the target language, and what does the word choice from this text, the job description, tell us about what the culture values? So how does discourse about jobs vary by culture? And as a learner, it's not simply enough to say, well, if I'm to be a globally competent job candidate, I will just do whatever is valued in US culture in whatever job interview I have. The other area where we've done a pretty significant redesign is on diversity and activism, which again is a common topic. So I have a little bit of a before and after here. We had a lesson that it was basically just a story about an activist in the Roma community in Spain. And the outcomes before were pretty undefined. General communicative method goal of giving students practice with negotiating communicated meaning. We focused on oral discussion and writing in class, a little bit of reading practice, and relating or sharing their own experience, their reactions to a text. We had some homework, which it was a textbook reading and an online post, some activities. In class materials was a video of the person, Joaquin Cortez, the activist. He's a famous flamenco dancer, so we saw a video of him dancing. And then the in-class oral discussion questions, and these are some examples. In your opinion, what is the most important thing he has done? How does he use his art to help people? Who in our culture uses their art to help people? If you were famous, how would you use your voice and why? And then the optional question is more of the broader, what's your experience with diversity? Why or why not is diversity important? The after part, we have some different outcomes. In this part, we wanted to integrate the idea of there's foundational knowledge that students need to be able to understand what's going on here. So we talk about the history of the Roma people, issues faced by them, and then the biography of the activist, Joaquin Cortez. We also integrated grammar goals here, preterite and imperfect, experiencing dialectal variation, and even problematizing the dictionary. So, same homework as before, and they also had a little bit of history of the Roma people. And then in class, instead of the video of the activist dancing, we have a public service campaign video of Roma kids and adolescents. And this was a relatively famous public service campaign in Spain. So the kinds of questions we asked then with this new text and with this new focus are, what are the key events in Roma history? When did it occur? Who was involved? What was the outcome? For the kids in the video, what was the problem? What happened? Who was involved? Etc. The kids in the video are talking about the meaning of the word gypsy as it's in the dictionary, which includes the word, part of the definition that's included is swindler, as that's a possible meaning of the term gypsy, los gitanos, or the Roma. So we also talk about what's the dictionary's responsibility. So we're getting at institutional racism here too, but in a small way. And then given this, what exactly did he do? What issues does his work address? And then cycling back to the forum, which is going back to the homework. And in this again, now we go back to the student. But you can see with these questions are not focused on the US student experience, right? These are focused on incorporating this new knowledge and actually examining the text a little bit to get at some of the goals that we wanted to achieve. There's also things like that we've done that I call the daily classroom practices, and we integrated some multi-literacies framework questions. Questions like whose perspective is this, whose perspective is missing or not present, the cultural values that are visible, and how does the author attract and keep attention. My animations are a little off here. Right, and again, with these questions, we're looking at how does the language used convey these messages, right? We need to tie it back to language. And then, of course, how do the messages confirm or challenge your perspective? We did gather a little bit of data in terms of what the student experience has been so far, and Mandy's going to share that with you.
So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I want to make sure we have a few minutes at the end for questions or conversation. So we did administer a 7-question survey to students, and what I'm going to present are just very preliminary, very general trends in what we saw, because we have not sat down and analyzed in any systematic way what the survey was saying. But overall, students were very positive towards the instruction in the course in which the materials were piloted, and they did say they either strongly agreed or agreed that the course encouraged them to consider global perspectives. So that's a win. However, we stopped to say, would students that didn't have these same questions asked say, yes, I did have that too in my Spanish class. So we don't quite have that answer. The other thing that struck me as I was reading through this is how general students were in their responses to the open-ended question. One of the open-ended question was, what were the most important things you learned in the course? And they would say, I learned about different perspectives, right? So we didn't get real specific into what they were learning, or they weren't real specific. And so we thought that we might need to be a little bit more explicit and transparent with them, even more than we feel like we have tried to be with the course goals and articulating those to specific activities in the classroom. One of the other things that struck me too is there was the final question is, what in this course most helped you to learn about global, international, intercultural issues? And almost every student had a different answer. So what really struck me about that was the fact that we really need to incorporate a variety of activities because different things reach different students. So just asking, one reflection question does not mean that that's going to help all 25 students in the class. We need to do multiple things. So to kind of wrap things up, we feel that we're kind of at a crossroads right now, both in the field as a whole and our position in universities and higher education, but also in our local context. So as a discipline, foreign languages enjoy a strong disciplinary tradition and occupy a logical position to lead the way in internationalizing the curriculum. However, we need to move past our traditional language development to negotiate meaning in, I'm going to have to say this word again, Sara, technologized and rationalized discourses. But we also have to help students be able to navigate complex social, academic, and professional spaces where the local and global contrast, contradict, or even clash. In order to do this, we must intentionally design courses and provide programs of study that embrace a complex, non-hegemonic, less US-centered interpretation of global competency. So we invite you to reflect on your practice and consider whether international perspectives are central to the goals, instruction, and assessment in your teaching, and if not, take action to move in that direction. We ourselves continue to reflect and act to improve the student learning in our courses, and we wanted to give a little shout out here. You can get information about the ITL program and an upcoming Internationalizing the Curriculum and Campus conference at global.umn.edu/ICC. And then we have many, many people that we're thankful for their contributions and their questions in pushing our thinking forward. So thank you. So we have a little bit of time for questions, thoughts. Marcelo.
I was wondering about your presentation. Universities, or here at this university, they talk about global competences and internationalization. Is there any discussion about the colonial implications of this? Like how this relates to power, because it's not the same thing to talk about internationalization, here than in Africa or Latin America.
I don't know at the institutional level. Do you?
Yeah,
because it seems to me like
there
that
were,
contaminates everything else. So sometimes it's
well,
like we're talking about frameworks and course goals,
absolutely.
without addressing like one central issue that is up there, and then it in some way encompasses everything else that we can do.
Right, and in fact, I would say that that's one of the things that I was made aware of even more by engaging in this process. To answer the quick question, the ITL program itself does incorporate many articles problematizing, not necessarily colonialism, but race and issues of power, which is a little bit different than what you were mentioned. But right, if you really do adopt the principles of this framework, that question is inevitable. Or it should be inevitable, right? This should lead you to question things like that itself, right? To questioning the framework itself, right? Because one of its goals is to reflect on things you do by taking a step back to begin to disentangle and at least identify how your cultural background was formed, which determines how you look at the world, which determines the questions you even consider asking. So I think that that's a really important point that I don't feel like it's incompatible. It's kind of where the framework should be leading us, in fact. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just curious how many foreign language faculty and teaching staff participated in the ITL program.
Well, the year that we went through, the 2016-17, there were 4, I think, and across both, the Twin Cities campus as well as some of the others. I don't know total. Do you have a sense?
I'm sure we do have it somewhere, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
I know there were at least a couple in other years because we were encouraged to get in touch with some of the alumni of the program, but a hard number I can't give you.
And Teresa Henderson from Rochester was also one of the people who works with intermediate language learners of Spanish. She was in our cohort too.
Okay, Corey?
Yeah, I'm interested in how you envision the graduate student training happening in this program, because the slide that you showed with the before and after, the work that you've done is really impressive and you can see the direction. But I think about all the teacher skills it takes to teach that after lesson, and then I'm trying to research on K-12 curriculum reform shows it's not enough to just give teachers the curriculum, they'll still teach the way that they learn. And so I'm curious as to how you see this working when you have your teachers every year teaching these courses.
This is one of our big challenges and something that we have talked about a lot, and it's also one of those things, right? We have both graduate students some who are very experienced, some who are, relative newbies to teaching, but we also have, in our department, we have a strong cohort of very experienced teachers. And so we also struggle with finding that balance of how prescriptive can you be and giving instructors some flexibility and autonomy in what happens in their classroom too, right? So I think we've talked a lot about goals and I think that map that Sara showed where we really map the goals to the assessments, to the instruction, if all of those things are aligned, I think it's a lot more helpful. But if you have this goal, but your assessment's still this, I think that leads to instructors sticking with the instructors staying with the instruction that they've always kind of done. So I think that alignment is one of the key pieces. Do you want to add to that?
And I'm sorry that Meredith McQuaid left, because I think another thing is funding and resources. Right, like you said, all those materials, right? If those materials aren't created, if materials aren't assessed for ease of use, if you're not able to provide people new to the course with great examples and support for developing, for learning about the principles, and again, that idea of the internationalization of the self is really key to this model. That doesn't happen in a week of orientation. So that is one of the things that I think that if we want this to be successful at the level we would want it to be successful at our university, we are going to have to reflect on that, talk about it more, and really address that issue. Because it's not a model, right? It's not a 50-minute talk and now you're ready to go, or even a 2-hour workshop you're ready to go kind of thing, and we need to address that.
Well, that's kind of my question from Northwell Community College, and our language department is spearheading an effort to internationalize the curriculum across disciplines. And it was kind of about how do you get buy-in from faculty members. I mean, some are obvious, like geology or history or English, although those guys or women are on board. They're already teaching all kinds of diverse perspectives. But like physics or chemistry, the hard sciences, do you guys have any ideas about how to approach those people who feel like they're already working really hard to just inculcate basic theory to students or basic knowledge?
Well, I could try to answer that question. We also have Sara Schoen and Barbara Beers, who are actually help run the cohort program. And I think that you're maybe if you could, would you be willing to say a little bit about that? Because you have firsthand experience, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, and my caveat is I was also new to organize the cohort this year as well. But we have alumni that are both, what were the two you did, chemistry and physics, yeah, that have done it and sort of have thought about, sort of stepping outside of, getting to sort of your question of the bigger question of where do these sciences come from? Like there's actually a lot of things that you look at. There are ways to approach people and get them to think about it. It is harder to get to them in some ways, but there are ways to do that. And so they go into all kinds of things.
But I think that idea, right, of having like people in the different disciplines who are working with this that can share those personal experiences about how it has impacted, whether it be their teaching or, but I think more importantly, student learning, and how by doing this, that doesn't mean that we have to compromise our other course outcomes, right? The content doesn't have to suffer because we're bringing in an international perspective, but rather that international perspective can really complement and enhance the learning that is already going on. So I think communicating that message, but it gets a little bit about, the question that Corey asked, it really does take teachers taking a step back and reflecting and considering what their practice is, why they're doing, and moving probably out of their comfort zone, which just can be scary.
Well, on a practical note too, if you look at, there's some great data on there about the percentage of international collaboration by your field of scholarship, and STEM fields are at the top of that. Most STEM-related fields are at the top. So I often have students say, well, I'm a biology major, why would I ever need to study Spanish? Or I'm a chemistry major, why? And we can look at that data and say, well, the chances of, the English major sitting next to you versus you having an international collaborator, you're probably much more likely to be in a context where you're going to be collaborating with someone who's from a different culture than you. I mean, although, of course, it depends on the situation.
And where would you look at that data?
I think I have it bookmarked. That I can give it to you after the presentation. Yeah.
All right, I think we're technically at the end of our time, so we want to be sensitive to those of you who need to leave to go to other things, but we can be here for a couple minutes if anybody else wants to talk. But thank you again very much for being here.
Thank you.